chair is an arc. There's a big sweeping one coming along here. And then there are vertical structural devices that tie everything down. Now you have to be able to read them through the figures. Here comes a vertical, and it's sustained all the way down here to the sardine can. They just finished lunch, incidentally, and they have wiped off all the food stuff, and this guy is explaining to these guys the meaning of time. And he's saying something like, time and memory are the same thing. There are others who can do a better job at explaining time and memory, but we're going to leave that to the physicists and the circus trapeze artists and the stand-up comedians. Now there's, structure is the means by which I communicate and make art. Art, form is art. Without it, visual gobbledygook. And I hope that when you look at these pieces, you'll see that everything is carefully woven together, tied together. Nothing is irrelevant. Everything is speaking to everything else as well. So in this painting, there are some other little memory anecdotes here. This thing right down there, that's a profile view of something called a antifix. These show up usually on the eaves of churches. And in this case, this is a woman's head, and then there's a kind of a floral pattern. If it was facing you, and I would have had it facing you if it had worked in the painting. But I ended up with profile. And that's, Marge and I spent 6 months living in Athens, in Greece. And we got around a lot, and at one point we encountered a pile of trash. And in that pile of trash, there was that antifix. And I picked it up and took it back to our apartment and got it through customs. It's still at the house. So that's a pretty vivid memory of our time in Athens. This is an oil, this thing here, also art, is an oil lamp. And it's part of a ceramics set of dishes that included this oil lamp that we also brought back from Greece. This is an echo of the dinner, the lunch that they had. This is a sardine can with the lid popped off. Sardines are all gone. They had been drinking wine, and I had put in bottles of wine, but they just were unnecessary and irrelevant. So I just imagined, okay, they're on the other side of the table there. We'll just not worry about making it look like glass. And they had just finished some pea soup. There are some peas still left in the little dishes down there, and the dog is looking at them wistfully. Another big, now those are the expressive elements. That's what constitutes visual expression. If you have a child who is trying to be, who is drawing and so on, don't worry about the expressive elements, but eventually they will be manipulating them and trying to speak the language that I am speaking in these images that I've made for you folks. Now, there's another big deal that's in my paintings, and I am partially successful with that. This is in conflict with my major aims. I'm working with a human figure. My theory is that the atmosphere is saturated with color. If I had a prism, I would hold it up to light and we'd see a display of the spectrum on the floor. In nature, of course, the rainbow is that. When I was a kid, I had been reading a book about Van Gogh, and I read that he had a theory, and his theory was that yellow was the equivalent of the sun. And I thought to myself, I need a theory. And I was walking home from the Art Institute in Kansas City, where I grew up, and it was the fall season, the autumn, and I was looking at the trees, and it suddenly occurred to me, what happens to the color that's in those leaves? And I imagined then, I think I was 19, maybe 18, something like that. I thought, well, the color gets radiated out into the atmosphere. It doesn't, of course, but that was a terrific moment for me. I can recall the color of the grass and the leaves that I picked off the trees to examine. And I thought, okay, if the air is saturated with color, it affects everything. You know, people walking through it are going to be transformed in some way by color in the air, this color-saturated atmosphere. And this painting is probably as close as I've ever gotten to immersing the human figure and transforming the human figure and emphasizing color in the air. There are three people in this painting. This guy is seated behind these rocks. Here's a couple that are embracing. There's a guy and there's a gal, and they are holding each other. But look, the painting is really about that red punching up against the figure, transforming the figures. There's a still life right behind us right there. A kitchen table with a book on it, and a cloth with a butterfly on it. And if you look closely, you'll see that the edges look like they have color bumping up against the edges. That's about as best I've gotten with color in the air, transforming the human figure. The problem is that when I paint the human figure, I want it to look like it's got mass and weight and substance. And if I bathe it in color, that just washes out this feeling of mass and weight. Some folks have asked me what are my influences artistically, you know, in art history, who are the big Jesus for me. Rembrandt, of course, is one. But there's a guy in the early Renaissance, Giotto. Does that ring a bell? Giotto's simplicity, substance, impact, visual impact, and then the emotional display that they have, his figures have for each other. So in some sense, you know, here we are, 2013. Here's a painting from the 15th century, and Giotto from the 14th. You know, I think he was born in 1336 or something like that. So there we have it. These are the imagery that I have cooked up. Deeply privileged to be having an exhibit like this, and equally so with your being here. Thanks a lot.